Hey, Peter, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's very good to be talking with you. Thanks for coming on the Glenn Show. This is Glenn Loury at Brown University and also bloggingheads.tv, the Glenn Show. And I'm lucky to have talking with me today Peter Moskos, who's a professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. He's a sociologist, a PhD from Harvard, and has spent some time actually working as a cop in inner city Baltimore. And so brings an interesting perspective to the topic of the day, of course, which is Black Lives Matter, police killings of black men, the demonstrations afoot, the shooting of police in Dallas, Texas recently, tragically. Today, the president is in Dallas for a memorial service for those fallen officers. And will be giving what I think everybody recognizes as a very important speech. And so I just thought it would be interesting to hear from you, Peter, about all of this. In particular, looking at your blog, Cop in the Hood, is that what you call it?
Yeah, which is confusing because it's also the name of my book, but originally they started together, so.
So where can people find that? You got a URL for us?
Copinthehood.com.
Okay, cop in the hood, COPN or INTHEHOOD
Yep.
.com. People should check it out because it's very provocative, interesting, and it comes from this perspective that you bring as both a scholar of criminal justice and so on, but also as a person who's had some experience on the ground policing in a big city. And the thing that struck me as I looked at your blog was that you were willing to pronounce your expert view about the extent to which you thought, the shootings that have been such a source of consternation and have provoked these demonstrations. The shooting of Sterling Castile in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota, and the shooting of Anton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, were good shoots, righteous shoots, or whatever the right word is in cop lingo, justifiable use of deadly force by a police officer under difficult circumstances. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share with.
That's not what I said about the Castile shooting.
Oh, no, no, no. I'm not saying justified or not. I'm saying you were willing to render your opinion about whether or not they were. That's all I'm saying. Please tell us what you think about those shootings is what I'm trying to get you to do.
Yeah. Well, look, let me talk in the abstract first. There are a lot of cases where cops shoot someone, and but we've moved in a point where it used to be, why did the cops have to shoot that innocent person? Or why did cops have to shoot that criminal with a gun? And I find that kind of pushing the boundary too far. First of all, and it is important to say, but I mean, we weren't there. We don't know what happened. We don't know what happened before either of those two cases. And in general, we don't know what happened, what leads up to a shooting. Often we do have video where we do see enough of what leads up, maybe not the whole situation, but at the moment the gun is fired, we have some perspective on the idea of, was there a threat? Was the shooting justified? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I find the public and the police are often on two different categories, or two different standards here. There's a legal standard. Would a reasonable cop do such an action? And I like to think I was a reasonable cop, and I can still speak from that perspective. And I am willing to judge sort of on the question of, do I think I would have shot in that situation? And if I think I would have, absolutely, I'm going to say it was a justified shooting. There are many shootings where legally the cops get off, because that's almost all police-involved shootings. That might even be reasonable, but they weren't necessary. And I kind of go, no, I think the cop was too quick. Now, look, I could be wrong, literally dead wrong in those cases, and that's why cops are very hesitant to judge. Some of it is an instinctive knee-jerk, always defend the cops, cops can do no wrong. I don't take that position, and I think it's harmful to police officers if we don't criticize what we see as bad policing, because both at a moral level, I want to improve policing. I do want fewer people shot. But if you say the cops are always right, no one's ever going to believe you. I mean, at some point, all cops know that occasionally, there are bad shootings, and it's not just Michael Schlager shooting that shooting the guy in the back in South Carolina, which everyone thinks was a bad shooting. That's sort of now the extreme case. But there have been others that were unnecessary, and there have been others that I think were bad. There is something, especially in the Anton Sterling case, where people were so quick to say, "Oh my God, that man was executed." I can't get over the fact the guy's got a gun. The cops know he has a gun, and we don't see where the guy's hands are. I can imagine a scenario, an entirely believable scenario, where the guy is reaching for his gun to kill the cops, and the cops shoot him. Is that what happened? I don't know, and nobody does know yet. But it's important to keep that in mind because, I mean, far be it from people who have, how many, have you ever wrestled with a man with a gun? Like, this is not, it's so easy to say, oh, they shouldn't have shot him. Well,
and I'm not looking forward to doing so in the near future
no,
either.
no, and cops don't look forward to doing so. It's not like this is something that cops do regularly. So I do think we need to give cops a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and say, my God, there's a man with an illegal gun there. That is a big deal. Doesn't necessarily mean the shooting had to happen, but if you got an illegal gun and you get shot, I kind of go, my God, it's on you. I mean, this is not, you're not out gardening, you're not out washing your car, you're not out driving, being stopped by police. And this is why the Castillo shooting, I think, was very different. And I also should point out, yes, we should wait for a more perfect victim, because you know what? In this case, we had to wait 2 damn days, okay, before Castillo was shot. We don't know exactly what happened at the moment of the shooting, but it's a car stop. So first of all, it's officer initiated. In the Sterling case, the cops were responding to a man with a gun, and there was a man with a gun. In the Castillo case, he's in a car, they're driving home, they get stopped. There are rumors that there was an armed robbery call somewhere. I don't know if that's true, but it doesn't matter. He wasn't the armed robber. It matters a little bit in the sense cops can be on guard.
But let me just ask you right here. My understanding, I mean, all I saw is the video, like everybody else is seeing. The cop has his gun out of the holster, pointed how does his gun get out of the holster? Why is he pointing a gun at this guy at that moment? I mean, any idea or any informed speculation about that?
After he shot?
No, not after. The gun is out of the holster and he's shot. We don't see what happened before, so we don't know if he approached the vehicle with the gun out or if he quickly drew the gun and then fired immediately after drawing the gun, given whatever provocation that might have occurred there.
Yeah, no, let's say, and I don't know if this is true, let's assume the cop thinks incorrectly, it turns out, that Castillo is an armed robber. Because there was some call for that, I believe. Though again, I don't know.
I've heard that too, but I haven't seen any.
That's why you'd have your gun out. Because you think you might be dealing with an armed robber. Okay, you have your gun out. I had my gun out a lot as a cop. The point is, you can't be shooting innocent people. A man with a concealed carry permit. God forbid criminals ever start putting their guns in holsters. That is one of the indicators to law enforcement that it's probably a legitimate gun and the guy isn't a threat. I don't know why criminals don't use holsters. They make a lot of sense, but thank God they don't. But it's one of the immediate ways you can say, hey, the guy's got a gun in a holster. He's probably responsible with that gun at least. Now, that's not no guarantee, but that's a sign. In a place where you can so here's my point. You got a car stop. I can imagine the scenario that leads up to it. It's a contained space. I don't know why, going back to Louisiana briefly, I don't know why Sterling was tased. I don't know why he was under arrest. We don't know any of that. It matters. May not be justified, but it may be. In this case, it's a car stop. And the cop is afraid. And the fear is, that's why he shot, because he was afraid. The question is, would a reasonable cop have been afraid? I wasn't there. I can't be 100% certain, but my thought is no. I cannot imagine a scenario where I would have shot this man who was not an armed robber, who I'm assuming was not pointing the gun at the cop, because why would he? And he got shot, and that can't happen, and it did happen. Okay.
Let me ask you about I want to ask you something about Anton Sterling. He's being tackled, as I understand it in the video. He's being wrestled to the ground by 2 police officers. So does that look like good tactical police, control of suspect behavior? Why isn't one officer standing back somehow to...
I don't know.
I'm asking you as a cop. I don't know.
My first, and I wrote this on my blog. I did say, why the hell did they tackle the guy? That is certainly not a I don't know. Louisiana's a big football state. I don't know. Um, I did have a commenter in my blog give a very eloquent defense of the tackle. That certainly made me go, what the hell is that about? That is not how I would have done it. But I just don't know. We don't know enough. Why are we picking this as where there is a man with an illegal gun as the call celeb of the moment? That's the part I don't get. We're basing national anger, personal anger, on anecdotes that we don't know what happened. When there are other cases we could use to illustrate these exact same points. But find it very hard to jump on the police or our bad bandwagon when so many of the cases that are being held up as an example involve cases where the police are not doing wrong. I'm not willing to say that in the Sterling case. All I'm saying is we don't know, so why don't we all shut up for a moment and tone it down?
Yeah, tone it down.
But you even by saying that, I've gotten flack for saying I wrote that in a CNN op-ed, and who am I to tell other people to tone it down? Well,
So one of the things I think is really valuable here, at least for me, is the discrimination that you're making between these cases, which of course can be generalized. That is, in one case, a routine officer stopping for traffic oughtn't to result in a shooting, and there's just like a lot of onus on the officer. An innocent guy, by all accounts, ends up dead because you stop somebody for a traffic stop. Hard to get out of that situation without the cop being wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe not murder, but something. Okay. I mean, he cop is wrong. Distinguishing between that and a situation where the police receive a call to come to a scene after somebody has complained that somebody is brandishing a weapon. They encounter an individual who indeed does have a weapon. They can't know whether it's legal or not at the time, but in any case, it proves to be illegal. And after the guy apparently doesn't comply, I mean, why are they tackling if he's complying with verbal command? He would presumably.
He was also tased. Again, I don't know why, but there's a series of events. So he was obviously at this point under arrest for what we still don't know.
So what I'm trying.
By the way, the Baton Rouge Police Department is doing a horrible job in getting information out. This was a problem in Ferguson where the police chief was an idiot basically and didn't understand that these things matter and just sort of closed shop. I don't think Baton Rouge is quite as bad, but at some point. I am ready to sort of express the police side here in some manner, and even I can't because I don't know the information. Well,
yeah, okay.
You think police departments would have learned by now?
That goes to transparency, and maybe they're afraid they want to keep it closed because they're afraid things are going to get out of hand. The other point that you're making is all of these cases, even though they can be distinguished one from another, Walter Scott shot in the back by this guy in South Carolina is going to be very different from, I don't know, Michael Brown shot by Darren Wilson in Ferguson, which is going to be very different from these two that we're talking about right now. And yet, the public meaning of these events seems only to be one thing. There's like only one key for talking about it, which is black man killed by police, yet another black man shot down by police. And I'm wondering what you think can be done about that. I mean, you're teaching at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I assume you're teaching people who are going to be journalists writing about crime. You're going to policemen and women who are going to be dealing with criminal justice matters and whatnot. What can sensibly be said about how we ought to publicly process these events? You say tone it down. Well, how does that actually get done in a world where, cable news is competitive and newspaper people have ideological agendas and movements have to have grist for their mill and so on?
Yeah. Partly you start by looking at data rather than anecdotes and individual cases. This is a country of 330 million people. Shit's going to go down every single day. If we're looking to be outraged, there's plenty of outrage. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't occasionally be outraged, but you can't go through life, both for your personal well-being, but also in terms of changing policy and improving things. You can't go through life from one day of the outrage to the next. That's what the right wing does to a large extent. I like to think that the left is a little more, in a truth and reality and data-based world. So I do think that's step one. That also, I forget who you were speaking to the other day about these matters.
John McWhorter.
And he mentioned, well, why is it always a black person shot? And why does this never happen to white people being shot? But it does. It does. And I do have that list he's talking about.
Very good. Tell us more about that, because I think that's such an important point.
The idea that the cops don't shoot white people is simply wrong. And there's some horrible shootings. If you go to my blog, there's one of the subjects is bad shootings, I think, they're white, blacks, and Hispanics in there. And some of the white ones are truly shocking, truly horrible. Jonathan Ayers, Reverend Jonathan Ayers in Georgia a few years ago was probably one of the worst. Charles Schultz in Maryland many years ago, but he was shot in a very similar way to Castillo. He was an innocent guy in his car who was shot by FBI agents for partially complying with their orders. These names are not household names. Because there's no racial link. It doesn't get picked up on the media. Though I also wonder, why the hell don't white people care that white people are getting shot? Where is our humanity? There are some bad shootings out there. So, yeah, I think race is overly emphasized. Would have Castillo been shot if he were white? I doubt it. Honestly, I think race matters. I don't think that cop would have been as afraid in that case. But to argue about that, to argue about the implicit bias and the subconscious prejudice, I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. I don't know if Castillo had been white, if he would have been shot. My guess is no. But, okay, where does that leave us? We're either going to eliminate all of racism in society and then improve things, but, that ain't going to happen. Or we improve things given the world we have. Think of the progress made in America briefly in the Reconstruction period, in the Civil Rights period. We didn't solve the white problem of racists out there, but we made the world better. So if we want to reduce police-involved shootings, and if we want to reduce the number of unarmed blacks who are shot by police, but I'm a little hesitant to use that term because unarmed does not mean you're not a threat. You can be killed by an unarmed person. But let's assume we do want police to shoot fewer people. I think that's a good goal. How do we do that? Well, first we have to look at who is being shot. Blacks are disproportionately shot, but not if you take levels of violence in the black community into account, not if you take the race of those who kill police officers. There is more violence and police respond to that. So a lot of the racial disparity among police-involved shootings is related to racial disparities in violence. But there are other disparities in shootings, regional disparities that no one seems to look at that matter a lot more. The example I give, and these numbers are coming off the top of my head, so I don't know if they're completely right, but they're close. California, in the state of California, you're 3 times as likely to be shot and killed by police than you are if you live in Michigan or New York or that's a third state, maybe it's New Jersey.
Wow, I would have never thought that.
Or maybe it's Pennsylvania. I forget. It's one other one. It's the largest.
We can look it up.
Those 3 states collectively have more people than California. Those 3 states collectively have 2 or 3 million more African Americans than California, and yet the number of shootings in California, and therefore basically the rate is 3 times as high. Why is this the case? And the answer is we don't know. Why don't we know? I don't know. But if we could simply get the rate in California down to the rate in New York State, which seems at some level eminently doable, we would save 100+ lives a year just in California. But no one talks about this. I don't know why. The New York City Police Department has one of the lowest rates of lethal use of force in the nation. The joke on the West Coast is because New York cops can't aim, and there's actually a slight bit of truth in that. But leaving that aside,
meaning that the disparity in the rate of discharging weapons is not as great as the disparity in the rate of actually killing people.
It's still. Let me emphasize the fact it's still great, but no, it's not as great. There is some truth that New York cops miss a lot, but is more of a side joke than the real truth is both are very low in New York City. A fraction of the national average. Last year, New York City, I think New York's cops shot 6 people and 8 million. That's at some point there's best practices here. But instead, people protest the New York City Police Department when someone in Baton Rouge gets killed. I don't understand. Look, I'm a relatively, I don't know, I have a long fuse. The idea that I'm outraged, therefore I have to go yell in the streets, I don't get it. If you're outraged, go change things and make things better. I love that the Dallas police chief said, get off the streets and put in a job application because we're hiring and we need you. If the goal is to reduce police shootings, don't complain about the NYPD because they're doing it right. And people don't know that. They don't get credit for that.
Now, I just want to emphasize, did you say 6 people out of 8 million in New York shot in a year?
Yeah, maybe it was 7. The previous 2 years it was 8.
Okay, so if I multiply 8 million by 40, I get 320 million. And if I multiply 6 by 40, I get 240. Okay,
yeah, and
but 1,000 people were killed by police in the country in the year.
Exactly.
So the rate at which it's happening in New York is like 1/4 of the national rate at which it's happening. And
yes.
that suggests that difference might really be telling us something, if only we could figure out exactly why. Because I can't believe that that shit doesn't happen in New York. Like it happens every place else.
And New York City is, I mean, it's a good example, partly because they keep great account of this, which a lot of police departments don't. It's their annual firearms discharge report gives the breakdown. But the numbers are so low. Yeah, it's a fraction of the national average, and then it's a smaller fraction of the California average. But yeah, so we could save 700-800 lives a year if we could follow the New York City Police Department example. But we won't, because all we're focused on is white cops shooting black people, which happens and deserves to be called out when it's wrong. But I don't see it leading to a solution. Now, look, here are some differences. First of all, New York City, it's not a gun culture, and that matters. It's not a gun culture on the part of criminals as much, and it's not a gun culture on the part of police as much. Most incoming New York City cops have probably never touched a gun in their life. So there might be, there might be an implicit bias to not reach for that gun because you're not used to doing that. That could be a factor. New York City cops, police, and partners, which is very expensive, but you avoid, and I don't know if it's worth it. I'm not necessarily for that. But you are never in a situation where you are wrestling alone with a suspect, which is a situation you never want to be in as a cop. Because you always have a partner there. So that matters too. But at some point, I got to give credit to hiring, training, recruitment. I mean, they're doing something right. And, perhaps I should be looking at that in more detail, but I'm not. I don't know what the answers are. Someone's got to figure that out. Because that's how we can actually reduce these shootings.
I want to ask you something else. Do you think, so I've often had the following thought, and I want to know if you think it should be taken seriously. The thought is, there is discretion in the protocols that police use in handling situations that are potentially life-threatening to the police officer. Those protocols can be more or less, restrictive in terms of the cop legitimately being able to, discharge his weapon. If we want fewer people shot, the advocates seem to be saying, and I'm not against them here, I'm just describing, well, let's tighten those protocols. Let's punish cops under a set of conditions which they hadn't necessarily been punished before. Let's try people for murder when they make a mistake. And like that guy in the housing project in Brooklyn, the Chinese American cop who shot his weapon discharged, it ricochets down the hallway, whatever. Now let's put him in the dock and and the consequence of that presumably would be to affect the police officer's behavior on this margin that I'm imagining between how much risk do I take versus how much, how quickly do I resort to the use of force, that would lead to officers, perhaps more officers being killed. Is it legitimate to think about that trade-off, public safety versus the police officer's safety? Or, because other people have been telling me the rate at which cops are getting shot in America today is much lower than it was a generation or 2 generations ago. Policing has never been safer. It's perfectly okay to make these cops take more risks. That's, after all, what they're getting paid to do. And if we could reduce by 20% or whatever the the number of police shootings, that would be a good thing for the public, and could probably be done without much imposing much cost on the police. I mean, is this kind of economistic way of thinking about trade-offs between risk to the cop and risk to the public a sensible way of thinking about it?
I think it is, actually. I think too often we don't talk about trade-offs. We don't talk about trade-offs between aggressive police and crime prevention, which we should. We don't talk about trade-offs between police use of force and police safety enough. If we're willing to say, you know, we can't have it all, there always are some trade-offs, yeah, I think that's a debate we should be having. In this case, again, I think it's a little bit barking up the wrong tree because some police departments are already doing it right, and generally the use of force guidelines are not that different. At some point, if you are in fear of your life, you can, or someone else's life, you can shoot to stop a threat. You know, every department has that. So I don't know how much the guidelines would change that reality. The idea of the job being dangerous is a fair one. Yeah, you know, the job. Yes, if cops always say officer safety is the most important thing, well, if it was the most important thing, you would never leave the police station. It's a very important thing, but yeah, the job involves danger, and cops know that, and it is part of the job, and you know, cops need to be respected for that. You know, as we saw in Dallas, cops protecting people and running towards bullets.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen, and that's why we have police to do that, because you and I don't want to. And cops don't want to either, that's the thing. They don't, you know, but they're willing to. The job is safer. The trend has been downward for decades. The number of cops shot and killed in absolute numbers is not that large. It's up this year, by the way. It's up this year significantly. But overall, the trend is down. But I don't quite understand how the trade-off, I want to talk trade-off, I don't quite understand how it would work after that.
Well, you said something earlier. You said this idea that a cop approaches a guy with a gun, the guy goes and makes a funny move or something like that. The cop's supposed to wait until the bullet is flying at him and he's supposed to shoot it out of the air? I believe that was one of your formulations. That seems kind of silly. In other words, there are going to be circumstances in which the cop can legitimately shoot. But how do you define those circumstances? And moreover, people talk about accountability, and I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on this. Can't cops make mistakes too? And what should be the penalty? I mean, they're, you know, legitimately authorized to use lethal force. They might make an error in doing so. What should be the penalty for the making of an error? Should it be 20 years in prison, life in prison, 5 years in prison? You know, I mean, not that there's a single answer to this, but how are we supposed to think about? I mean, if I'm operating a construction crane, and you know, I got my cell phone in my hand, and the crane swings too far, and you know, a building gets knocked down, and 5 people get killed. Well, you know, shit, I fucked up. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a really bad thing. Of course, I should be punished. Life in prison feels like too much, doesn't it?
Well, look, I'm not a fan of prison. Period.
Okay.
We don't have, you know, I've written a book about mass incarceration, so I never want to hear people being sent to prison for decades. I think it's a failed system. But the real question is about punishment, and there are other ways to punish. Look, if the crane operator makes an accident, he's not going to be charged criminally. If he's on his cell phone while making an accident, that usually rises to the level of criminal negligence because there's some other factor. So there is, you know, the honest mistake, and there's the what the hell were you thinking mistake, you dumbass, you know. And police, I think, to some extent, have to be judged on the same way. I mean, you know, right now it's the reasonableness standard. All the police actions don't meet that test. But we don't have a case where, I mean, you know, if the crane operator is drunk or the cop is drunk on the job and shoots someone, you know, that's a whole different level.
Sure.
We can reduce the number of mistakes. I think here's my problem with focusing on a punitive system of deterrence for cops is it's going to rely on the judicial system and criminal conviction, and more societal moral justice is not found in that system. It is hard to convict criminals in this country because of our Constitution, because of the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, and so on. The same holds especially true for cops who know that system very well. It is hard to convict anyone. It's particularly hard to convict cops. So if we rely on criminal conviction, I think we're going to be disappointed time and time again. It doesn't mean that it should never happen, but that should not be the default system for catharsis of traumatic events. We have to reduce the number, first of all, which we can do without the judicial system. And then we also have to consider, there are other forms of punishment. Part of the problem that departments face when cops screw up is very early on, you generally have to decide, are you going to try to bang them departmentally, or are you going to do a criminal prosecution? It's hard to do both, because the second you press charges, then the cop has constitutional rights, particularly the Fifth Amendment.
He's innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, and you don't have to testify against yourself.
Yeah, okay.
But departmentally, you, sir, I can order you to talk right now, or I'm going to fire you. You don't have those rights as a cop in the department. So you can get suspended, you can get fired, but if you are forced to testify, then that can't be used against you in court. So departments sort of have to choose if they're going to do it departmentally or work with the prosecutor at that level. Someone makes that choice. But just because you're being punished departmentally, look, if you're fired from your stable job with a pension, that's real punishment.
No doubt.
Often it's considered, that cop, nothing happened to him. Well, no, he got fired.
And he lost his pension. Now, I think the point here is really important, and it's subtle. And I'm understanding it to be that accountability is not properly measured by severity of punishment.
Yeah, and accountability is not.
What we want is accountability. What we should want is effective accountability.
Transparency and accountability. To put this very mildly, there's lots of room for improvement there. Police departments generally do just a shitty job on those two things, and it has consequences. So yes, so often cops are held accountable and nobody outside knows about it. And you can say, well, it's none of their business. Well, actually, sort of is some of their business. Police departments should be more transparent. Time and time again, you see police departments getting in trouble because, look, you see this in any large bureaucracy. It's not just police, but it's worse than police. The impulse is always to not stick your neck out. God forbid, you try to be accountable, but you say something and it gets misquoted or you say it wrong, then you get in trouble. I don't know how, these are just institutional management problems, but they're important. How do we get a culture in the police department that is more willing to be open, that is more willing to take PR risks that sometimes go wrong? You see, social media type postings. How quickly do you put out information? What if it's not right? That happened during the Dallas massacre. That information went out that was incorrect. Yeah. Then you have to correct it, but it's better than saying nothing. But understand, like everything else, there are even trade-offs in transparency and accountability, because you make errors, people may be innocent, that kind of thing. But we do need to see a trend towards that. And police departments have to learn. They have to care about what the public thinks. And that might sound obvious, but to a lot of police departments, to too many police departments, I should say, they don't think about that enough.
Did you see the report in the New York Times this morning about the study that Roland Fryer at Harvard has put out of the police use of force and whether or not it's racially discriminatory, finding, and I'll be brief, that with respect to shootings and the use of deadly force, after he controls for characteristics of the encounter and the conditions under which the police are interacting with the citizen, he sees no racial difference in the likelihood that the police would shoot. But other use of force, what he calls laying hands on the citizen, pushing them to the ground, cuffing them even though you ultimately don't arrest them, smacking them around or whatever, that there's a significant, 20-25% greater likelihood that a black citizen encountering the police officer will be met with force of that kind, other things equal, compared to a white citizen. I'm just wondering if you saw that study, or at least a report about the study, and if you had any reactions to it.
I've saw it. I have it downloaded. I have not yet read it. Okay. I spoke to Nick Selby, who's a police officer in Texas who focuses a lot on getting the context of these shootings. He's done a lot of good work. We actually, we also co-wrote a piece, I think, for the Washington Post. And I asked him, I said, Nick, help me out here. I haven't read it yet. I need to. And he said it's a fabulous study. So I'm going with that. It does, you have to take the context into account, and it's too rare that happens. I bang my head against the wall when I just hear, and it's usually about African American, it could be about any group. Okay, African Americans are 3 times as likely to be shot as whites, which is true, but you need the context. What are these shootings? How did they happen? And you don't just need the context for the moral accountability, though that's part of it. It again has to do with how you reduce it. Who initiated a lot of these bad shootings as of late? I'm thinking of Tamir Rice in Cleveland. I'm thinking of the guy who was shot in a Walmart.
Yeah.
You have cops who basically become force multipliers for an ignorant member of the public.
Yeah.
Potentially a racist, malicious member of the public, but let's just say at least ignorant because they happen to be wrong. Cops show up and become force multipliers for that ignorance. That needs to change, but that becomes a system of how does the information get to police officers. Yeah. Generally, I prefer police-initiated stops to hold police accountable. Because cops, look, they make mistakes and they're good ones and bad ones, but at some level they are trained professionals by definition. And I trust a trained professional handling a situation than a member of the public who doesn't know what's going on. So these are the type of contexts. Mental illness is a huge issue. Why we have police dealing with mental illness is a shame to our society, but nobody else is, and people call the cops on crazy people. Why we have police often becoming, I don't even know what the word is, but having to deal with homeless people because of quality of life issues and crime. Good God, this is a rich and powerful nation, and we don't have a better way of dealing with this. Yeah. So instead we lock up our mentally ill people. I just came from Seattle, where I have to say I'm a bit shocked by the Hoovervilles, the tent cities in this great nation of ours. This is a collective failure in America. This is also, to some extent, a failure of liberalism in cities where we cannot, in San Francisco and Seattle, and to a lesser extent New York. These are not insolvable problems, and somehow we lack the means or the frame of reference or the money to solve these problems. So instead we live with them, and then when things get screwed up, we call cops and blame them. Freddie Gray in Baltimore, in this absurd trial where the prosecution hasn't even shown there was a crime committed, much less that anyone's guilty. Yeah. But think of how many people failed Freddie Gray before the cops had to deal with him. Yeah. He had lead paint. He had a drug-addicted mother. Yeah. He dropped out of school. He's hanging around a drug corner. All these things, and failure after failure, but then the cops touch them, and it's all their fault. You
remember Laquan McDonald, Chicago. Now, that shooting, there's no way that shooting was righteous, right?
And I said, if I, in that situation, look, I'm not a perfect judge, but my first thing is, would I have shot? And I said no.
Right.
So I go, okay.
And even if you would have shot, you would have stopped shooting after 1 or 2 shots, right?
Those extra shots?
He put 16 bullets into this kid or something like that. But what I wanted to say was the Chicago Tribune, I don't know if you saw it, they did kind of like an extensive profile on Laquan McDonald's life. And you're talking
with the state.
You talk about being failed by one system after another, educational, social services, his own family, etc. The poor kid. He never had a chance, So finally, at the end, he's staggering down the middle of a street at 1 o'clock in the morning. He's under PCP or whatever, and he's got a little knife in his hand, and he's not responsive to the police commands. And this asshole, executes him on the streets of Chicago. May burn in hell, as far as I'm concerned, the asshole. But Laquan McDonald was let down by many, many, many systems, and then finally by a bad cop.
And because the buck stops with policing. That cop should be blamed. I agree with you that's however you phrased it. Yes, preach on. But let us also turn to the preceding events of the previous, I don't know how old Laquan was, 18, 20?
17 or 18, I think.
Let's turn to the preceding of 18 years, because the goal should go beyond just punishing cops to say, how do we prevent the next one of these from happening? And again, earlier on I said, this is a large country of 330 million people. Something will happen today. Cops are going to shoot and kill another 2 or 3 people today and tomorrow and the day after. And I guarantee one of them's going to be caught on video, and then one of them's not going to look good. Good God, why? Let's turn the clock back. I mean, McDonald was a ward of the state. So, and by the state, I don't mean them. I mean us. He was our responsibility. First, though, perhaps you say, why was he a ward of the state in the first place? But he was. So we have failed him. We don't have these systems. And I don't see the outrage going to those systems that not only can prevent people from getting killed by police, but just at a moral level, we have to help people. And we don't help people who may be undeserving. So a lot of the debate is, about deserving versus undeserving poor. When I speak to conservatives, I'm quick to concede that point. Let's say someone's undeserving. You can argue no one's undeserving, but let's just concede that. Okay, now what do we do? I've accepted your conservative moral judgment here for the sake of argument. Okay, now what?
Yeah.
They don't have an answer.
Yeah.
People need help, and some people need more help than others. And God damn it, we can help a lot of people in this country. We do have the resources. We lack the moral will, and I think that is to our shame.
I think I want to end on that, Peter, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you. So we'll stay tuned, and maybe there'll be some, sadly, inevitably, there will be something more along these lines to talk about again.
Yeah, unfortunately, but let's hope, we can talk more about how to make things better than how we just more recently messed up.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you very much, Peter Moskos.